There's apparently like this Jeff Kaplan interview that's been pretty big, and he talks about a lot of crazy stuff in here. Like he talks about Titan, the failed Blizzard project that eventually rose up Overwatch. He talks about building World of Warcraft. A lot of WoW cool. Apparently, it's a great interview.
You were first a legendary video game player, in particular in EverQuest, before you ever became a legendary video game designer on World of Warcraft and on Overwatch, which I think is a wild journey to go through, from gamer to designer. But first, let's go way back. When did you first fall in love with video games?
I was lucky. I was born in that golden era of coin-op. So I literally remember the first time seeing Pac-Man. I was with my uncle Ronnie, and he just kept feeding me quarters. I think he wanted to play, but...
Is that like arcade games? Oh. Man, how old is Jeff? The fuck? I had arcades growing up. I guess maybe his era was like super arcade games. Like probably even deeper. I feel like arcade games kind of died off as I got like to, you know, my teenager years.
Was too scared.
I guess some baseball, like after baseball season was over, like we'd have that party to celebrate. He's 50. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, he's got like an extra 20 years of arcade games. All right, moving on.
Too, so he, you know, his little nephew, he would just give him quarters to play Pac-Man. I remember being at my brother's graduation in Philadelphia. They had an asteroids machine in the lobby. That was one of the first coin-op machines I had played as well.
I'm going to skip through a lot of this.
My brother and I would...
Because it's 5 hours long, and I love Jeff, but I don't need to hear about his writing career. I don't need to hear about him playing Pac-Man or his cousin. Getting hired at Blizzard. I'm curious on this one.
So speaking of which, you have to tell the epic origin story of how you got the job at Blizzard. As we said, you were this legendary gamer and now legendary troll on EverQuest, username to go. You gave a lot of edgy feedback to the devs, telling them in now famous, there's several rants. There's a famous one where you tell many of them to do a bunch of things, including to pull their heads out of their asses. You were loved and respected. Because
hold on. Fix your goddamn buggy bullshit half-assed encounters. The amount of time we dedicated to get our keys to see this guy die and take a turn at the Emperor is just sick. To finally see Blood die only to have the entire raid DT'd from anywhere in the room was simply an insult. Blood died. What is blood? Blood dies. There was 2 earrings on the corpse, yet no matter where you are in the room, the Emperor DTs. So congrats, Rot, on those. It's cheap enough to make a mob DT in the first place, but to have his aggro radius extend to the entire room is ridiculous. So let me get this straight. And this is how you guys envision this in San Diego. You spend months farming keys to get up to the room, months farming Shisar, Bane weapons, and the recipes were, you kill Blood while dealing with 8 other snakes in the room, and immediately after that, you're supposed to engage the death touching from anywhere in the room. The Emperor, along with the 8 snakes, whoever came up with this sheer fisting of an encounter can go fuck themselves. Do me a favor so I don't waste my guild's time on this kind of jackass shitfest again. Send me an email at tigo@legacyofsteel.net when you decide to A, implement an encounter that wasn't designed by a retarded chimp. Chained to a cubicle. Get a quality assurance department. Actually beta test the fucking thing and depatch it live. And please, for God's sake, do it in the order I laid it out for you. Don't worry, I won't charge you a consulting fee on that one. And good luck, you might as well pull your heads out of your asses while you're at it. Rename the game to Beta Quest, since you've used up your allotted false advertising karma on the bizarre and user interface scam of a one. Oh, fuck, that is so funny. God, that is so fucking funny.
You gave a lot of specific ways that the game could be improved.
The fact that it comes from Jeff as well is so good.
You actually really loved and cared for the game, and you gave them, in the language of the time,
Oh.
advice on how to improve their game. And it's funny because like you look back to those messages, it's
Ugh.
inspiring to me. It should be informative and inspiring to a lot of people because you're really legit full-time talking shit. And now, and always have been, like one of the kindest, most loved human beings in the entire
Fuck,
gaming
that is
industry.
so funny.
Anyway,
Look at his
how did that
smug
lead
ass
to you
face.
getting a job with Blizzard?
Behind the
So when
curtain.
the first guild leader
He's-
left Legacy
he's
of
a
Steel, the
demon.
founder, he was a guy named, his online name was Dread. That was his name. He left. And our guild was kind of in this listless spin for a while. And eventually somebody stepped up and took his position as guild leader. And that person's name was Ariel,
Mhm.
who was this blonde wood elf warrior
Remembers the hair color
female
of his.
who always refused to wear a helmet because thought their character was so pretty, wanted to show their face
I
all
guess
the time.
okay. All right.
So Ariel was a great guild leader for us and made me like a assistant guild leader, raid leader, officer type in the guild. And over time, Ariel got busier and busier and would send me messages like, "Hey, I'm not going to be online, tomorrow, or I'm not going to be online tonight. Can you run the raid? Can you run the raid?" And running the raids was very natural for me. And it was my first experience with leadership in my life of like, how do you motivate people? Like, what does motivation look like? What does discipline look like? How do you inspire people? When do you force people versus encourage them? So it was a learning experience for me on the fly. And I had the safety net of the real guild leader would log in eventually.
I should mention, I'm just now reading about, doing a bunch of research on Justinian of the Roman Empire, and he rose from being a peasant to being emperor. So I see a lot of parallels in your life journey from peasant to emperor. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
At least EverQuest guild leader. That's as much as I
Uber
can
guild.
say. Uber guild leader, best guild on the nameless server. So as time went on, Ariel became busier and busier. And then one day they contacted me and we were having this like whisper back and forth. And they said, you're going to have to take over the guild. I'm just too busy. And then it came out later. Well, let me back up a second. I started fooling around like around this time, Half-Life 1 had come out. And with both Duke Nukem and
One.
Half-Life 1, one of the incredible things that those companies did back in the day was when they shipped the game, they shipped the editor on the CD.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were curious enough, you could like fire up that editor and fool around with it. So I made a Duke Nukem level, and you'd send it off to like those UK programming magazines, and you get excited because your level was in some random magazine. And then I started making like Half-Life levels, and Ariel had stepped down as guild leader. I had become guild leader,
Mm-hmm.
and then at one point, Ariel contacts me and says, "Hey, you were talking about those Half-Life levels you made. I want to see those." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. Like, I didn't know you played Half-Life. Like, yeah, maybe we can get a server up and I can play them." And Ariel tells me, "No, mail them to this address in Irvine."
Oh
And
shit.
because, again, to rewind in the time machine for a second, to send something like a Half-Life level over the internet would have taken like 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually like burned it onto a CD and stuck it in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
So I put my Half-Life levels, I send them to Ariel, and he says, "My name's Rob. I'm a designer at Blizzard Entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I hear you're in Pasadena because you mention it. I would write about, the Rose Parade and all these things on our website. It was blogging before blogging existed. So he knew I lived in Pasadena. He's like, Irvine's only an hour away. Why don't you come down, see Blizzard, and you can also meet, and he names like 4 people in the guild. And I'm like, they all work at Blizzard too? He's like, yeah, we're all Blizzard.
How do
And
you
it was
not know
so
that?
weird because
Being in that
during
guild,
that
playing,
era, I didn't have
every
a
day,
lot of
all day.
money. It
Sit in
was not
Ventrilo.
like kind
That's
of
crazy to me.
nowadays, it feels like everybody plays every game, but you had to be selective. So, like, I never bought StarCraft or Diablo or Warcraft. I was much more of the Half-Life, Quake 3 guy around that time. And I never played a Blizzard game, and I just got invited to, like, go to Blizzard Entertainment.
Was Blizzard already legendary? You know, with the Warcraft and Starcraft, was it building this like great legend of this game company that
I don't
seemingly
think Blizzard
doesn't
was that
miss?
big at the
It
time.
was
Without World of Warcraft.
very much on its way to enshrining itself as being one of the legendary game. Like, it was beloved
Mm-hmm.
by gamers, but there were still ignorant people like me.
Like, it was definitely beloved, but I don't think, again, maybe StarCraft. I mean, StarCraft was the biggest game, wasn't it? Diablo 2 and Warcraft 3. Yeah, I guess, but okay, so you understand how niche gaming was, though. Wasn't gaming super fucking niche? And World of Warcraft broke through that barrier, but it was beloved behind the barrier. I really don't think a lot of people were playing these games. Like, PlayStation existed. That was it. And the World of Warcraft, again, still Warcraft is such a nerdy term and no one cared about it. At least you couldn't say it out loud without being shoved into a locker. But yeah, I don't know. Interesting. We had tons of LAN parties for StarCraft. I didn't do StarCraft, so I don't know how big it was there, but I damn well know no one was talking about it at school. Or World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft eventually kicked in, but I played Warcraft 3.
Who hadn't played, War 2 or Diablo 2 or StarCraft, which was shocking to people.
So you weren't like freaking out.
No, I was freaking out in a different sense. I'm like, am I going to get mugged when
Right.
is this a scam? Because you didn't meet people off the internet.
Yeah.
So
Also,
I drove down there.
Just another thing, I mentioned he should have known they worked at Blizzard and someone said people were anonymous. I think people were a lot more... I think your gaming life was so much more separated from your real life back then. Because, yeah, I'm thinking about people I talked to back when I was 10 on Ventrilo. Yeah, I never got around to even learning their real name. You just didn't talk about it. Everything was there was no Facebook, there was no MySpace. You were a different person online altogether. All right.
I ended up, there was Rob Pardo,
Mm-hmm.
who at that time was the lead designer on Warcraft 3. And he was Ariel, so, okay, it wasn't a woman after all. It wasn't this blonde wood elf. I don't know what you expect at that point. It was Rob Pardo. To this day, a great friend of mine named Scott Mercer was the enchanter in our EverQuest guild, a guy named Dale O'Min. There was a guy named Roman Kenny who was like this totally psychotic wizard who played in our guild. And I had lunch with these guys. We just went out to Irvine to like a restaurant. And, forgive me for the misuse of the phrase, but it was like my coming out moment. And we talked about games having that stigma and being embarrassed about who you are and what you like. Like, up until that point, I would never tell friends, family, like, I love games. I'm playing this game, EverQuest. It's so cool. We just killed a dragon. And so you were hiding this part of your identity. And I'm out to lunch with these guys in Irvine, and we're talking about dragons and swords and, raid tactics and talking shit on all the people in the guild. And I literally had this moment where I felt like myself for the first time. I just felt like so comfortable. And that was an eye-opening moment. And after that lunch happened, he invited me for a couple more lunches down, I just saw it as like, oh, now I made friends with these people online. Now we know each other in real life and they happen to work for this game company. And another one of the lunches, they invite this troll warrior to have lunch with us, whose name in the game was Barfa, the troll warrior.
Mm-hmm.
And Barfa wasn't somebody who played with us all the time, but kind of like Ariel got into the guild kind of on the side. You know, it was one of those like inside invites of like, who's Barfa? I don't know, but Barfa's in the guild now. And there was, at the time, it was a new dungeon called The Hole. And we had never done it before. And we jumped down in this hole and we're doing this whole dungeon and everything goes wrong, as it's prone to do in EverQuest. And the whole guild escapes except for Barfa, whose troll character's so big he can't jump out of the exit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this potion that was like a really expensive potion that was a teleport potion that, you know, no one but someone in the Uber guild could afford at the time. And I hand the potion to Barfa and I say, here, use this. It'll teleport you out. And I'm a rogue. I can just stealth and get out of the dungeon on my own. So I saved Barfa, not really knowing who Barfa was. And I did it with a very expensive potion. Having lunch, Rob introduced me. This is Alan Adham. He plays Barfa. I'm like, oh, Barfa. And we, you know, you saved me in the hole that time. Well, it turns out Alan was the founder of Blizzard and he was the head. He was sort of the head of everything at that time. It was Alan, Mike Morheim,
Wow.
and Frank Pierce. And what I didn't realize with these lunches were like, I just loved them because I felt like I was myself. I felt true happiness being surrounded by these, you know, people who were talking about video games.
Okay. The way I sum this up is all these Blizzard employees sucked at the game, and then they had their best player in the guild being Jeff. They brought his ass in to work for the game. That's how I'm seeing this. He's the carry. He really is. Whether it be time investment or mechanical skill, I'm not sure the details, but it's definitely more time investment. That's for sure, with Ariel not doing shit. I guess he's working at Blizzard.
And I felt comfortable around.
Let's go, Jeff.
And one day, Rob logs into EverQuest. He wasn't playing much at the time. He said, I want you to tomorrow to check the Blizzard job site.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, like I'll check the Blizzard job site. And they had announced World of Warcraft and posted on the job site was the job for an associate quest designer. And the funniest part of it was, I forget if it was a requirement or a plus in the job description, but they're like, we really want somebody with a creative writing degree.
He was so unemployed that they hired him.
You guys set this up for me. Like they were just looking, and it was that hindsight moment of like, actually, these guys were just interviewing me for 6 months. And they were actually friends, and they were really cool about it too. And I just had the fuck it moment, like that job opened up. I applied with all my heart, you know, like they had a bunch of quest writing on it. And then I went through like a pretty hardcore 6-month recruiting process because they never hired designers from out of the company. Traditionally, designers were promoted from within Blizzard. Either they would like transfer out of other disciplines, or they would come from quality assurance, tech support. So hiring somebody off the street was kind of a big deal for them. And they really put me through a grilling. It was the first time I met Chris Metzen, who is maybe the most inspirational, creative person on the planet. And you instantly, they paired me, they did this interview pairing. There were these two guys. It was Kevin Jordan, who is one of the original designers on WoW. Really, he doesn't get enough credit for his contributions. He was one of the earliest class designers, PvP designers. But he's a really...
I never heard that name either.
WoW. These two guys, it was Kevin Jordan.
Kevin Jordan. Look at him up. Kevin Jordan. I feel like I've seen his face probably in interviews here and there. Interesting. All right. Looks like he did a thing with Stay Safe as fan tips. I see some Asmongold. I don't know. Moving on.
Who is one of
Staff of Jordan is named after him. Oh. Didn't realize that. Okay. The more you know.
the original designers on WoW. Really, he doesn't get enough credit for his contributions. He was one of the earliest class designers, PvP designers.
I mean, that is some foundational World of Warcraft stuff. Class designing probably had big sway on which classes are even in the game.
But he's a really quiet guy. And they paired him with Chris. And Chris just owns the room. You know, Chris, you could just sit and listen to him. He's so creative. He's so passionate. And the way he articulates things, like you just instantly become a fan of Chris when you're around Chris. And Chris, Kevin, and I go to lunch at this Italian place that was across the street from Blizzard. And I remember Chris made a stop to buy cigarettes, on the way to the interview. And then every other word out of Chris's mouth was like, fuck and shit. And I had come from this whole like corporate culture from my dad's recruiting business where I'd never imagined somebody would curse in an interview or stop to buy smokes. And again, it was like, I'm around my people. Like I never smoked, but just, being around people who didn't care about what the corporate norms were was so inspiring. And then my last interview was with Alan and Rob and a great programmer named Bob Fitch. Like, I think he's one of the first 5 developers at Blizzard. And they took me to an Arco station that had a Jack in the Box. You know how like sometimes they'll combo? It was like Arco Jack in the Box.
I like how he remembers the most pointless details.
But Blizzard was at the Arco Jack in the Box. And I remember thinking to myself, these guys just brought me to a Jack in the Box that's in an Arco station. I need to work here. Like these are my people. This is where I belong. Like it was the greatest thing ever. And so yeah, that's my crazy journey to Blizzard.
Start at the bottom and end up at the top in the Jack in the Box. Can you speak to, because you mentioned some of the low points in depression through that journey? How did you find your way out? So can you just, a lot of people are sitting in those low points right now listening to this. What kind of wisdom can you draw about finding your way out, finding your people?
Okay. I'm good. Building World of Warcraft. I'm curious on this.
Characters and roles and classes. You pick a race, appearance, starting zone, small racial bonuses, and a class, how you fight, what your role is in groups. Can you continue fill in some of the gaps? What is World of Warcraft?
World of Warcraft, first of all, more than anything, is a world. Like it's a world that you can live in with real other people, and everybody's kind of living out their fantasy.
Well, you shouldn't live in it.
Chris Metzen, who was the creative director on World of Warcraft, and really like Alan Adham, who's one of the founders of Blizzard, calls Chris the heart and soul of Blizzard. And it's almost like when you're making a Blizzard game, you're making Chris's imagination at some point. And Chris famously said the lead character of World of Warcraft is the world. And I always believed that. So you're trying to create this place that's exciting and dangerous, but comfortable, but uncomfortable, and gorgeous. And, it should feel massive. And it really is. It's, can take a half an hour to get from one end of the world to the other. But it's this world you're living in. The world is divided into 2 warring factions. There's the Horde and the Alliance. And that was a very important, very controversial decision.
Really?
That was made by Alan Adham, was the champion of the Horde and Alliance.
And that in the early days, there was a really strong division.
Strong division.
Like,
yeah.
You pick a side and then you hang around with only people your kind.
Yeah, and you get it tattooed in real life on you. Like, the amount of people who walk up to me and show me their horde tattoo, like,
That's
it's
awesome.
epic. It's like
Yeah.
it's become who they are. Like, if you
Yeah.
were to say, like, "Hey, Lex, come play World of Warcraft with me. We're Alliance on Tichondrius," you'd be like,
Right.
"Dude,
Lose my number.
Alliance? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't think we can be friends
Yeah.
anymore." But the Horde Alliance decision was really controversial because in EverQuest, it was mixed race.
Yep, I bet Jeff was against the decision to have factions.
They had all the races kind
Which
of
is
like
fine.
WoW did, but they could all group with each other.
Mhm.
And Pardo and I came from EverQuest, where we felt like this was a horrible
Oh, there
decision
it is. Yep.
Alan was
I saw it
making.
coming.
And we argued, Alan, Rob, Bob, Fitch, and I would have lunch every single day. And we would just talk about WoW and the core design of WoW. Rob wasn't even on WoW at that time. He
Mhm.
was finishing Warcraft 3. And we would fight over the Horde Alliance split if it was a good idea or not. And he came from more of the Dark Age of Camelot community, which was another massively multiplayer online game
Oh,
that
man.
was more PvP based.
Mhm.
And he said the magic of that game was they had 3 factions, and he liked the fact that you were instantly on a team. You weren't a loner in the world, and whether you liked it or not, you had people on your side. And Rob and I just argued and argued against it, and then sometime before beta, Alan retired. He went on to run a hedge fund of all things, like
Mhm.
got super into poker, got super into finance, left and retires like I think it was 9 months to a year before WoW
Really?
shipped,
What?
which is kind of nuts. And Rob takes over as lead designer in Alan's stead. And to Rob's credit, the first thing he did was go, speaking to what we were speaking about earlier, he said, Alan's a smart guy. The fact that he was fighting so hard for
Mhm.
Horde Alliance, we got to do it. And Rob and I sort of changed our point of view and got on board with Horde Alliance and went all in. And so, the early days of WoW it was a great team. It was a mix of these veterans that we all looked up to. We had Mark Kern running the team. Shane DeBeery was, you know, legendary Blizzard developer. Bill Petrus was the art director. And then we had Metzen, who was sort of like Metzen was the cool big brother we all, aspired to
Mhm.
be. I'm older than Metzen, but I looked up to him like a big brother. And then there were a lot of us who had never done it before, or they had also pulled a lot of people from other teams and other game types. Like, for example, the guys building the dungeons, they hired out of the Quake community. And because they didn't have any hardcore MMO designer on the staff at that time, it was, Kevin and Eric and Alan were sort of the only designers. They started building Quake dungeons
Mhm.
as like Quake levels as the dungeons. At one point, WoW was even made in QE Radiant, which
What
was
does
the
that mean?
Quake engine. And
Oh
then
my
they
God.
later, retooled to where they were using a proprietary engine. So we were like this hodgepodge, like the Bad News Bears is
Mhm.
how I would describe the WoW team, of this mix of veterans
I do feel like
and
a
then
lot of
people
a
like
lot of the
me, like,
classic dungeons could be much easier to navigate if you were a Quake character doing the fucking bee hopping through like Wailing Caverns. I feel like you could bee hop to the end. I don't know.
I'm just some fucking
Maybe that's
idiot,
the play.
who played a lot of EverQuest.
Yeah.
And I end up at
Designing
Blizzard.
quests.
Yeah, like, okay, we're gonna design World of Warcraft now. And I've said this later with hindsight. I think a huge part of WoW's success especially with the early WoW team, Team 2 in its earliest formation, was that we didn't know what we were doing. You kind of like it's that Titan was the example for me. Titan was the attempt at making an MMO after World of Warcraft at Blizzard, and we failed horribly, and we had the best of the best on that team. And it's because everybody was too much of an expert on how to make a groundbreaking phenomenon MMO. World
This is
of
what
Warcraft was
this is actually the main thing I wanted to listen to, because I don't know much about Titan, but it was a failed project that cost it was massive, and then all of a sudden it was just gone. So
a bunch of people, like a very successful, sure of itself company who had made StarCraft, Diablo, Warcraft, with a bunch of yahoos, basically, who was like, yeah, we can compete with Sony Online.
Yeah.
At the time, they were making EverQuest 2. Like, if we go back in the time machine, EverQuest 2 had been announced, and EverQuest fans, we were just drooling for EverQuest 2. It wasn't, oh, cool, World of Warcraft. It was EQ2 was going to take, the chalice and run with it. And then, of all things, they announced Star Wars Galaxies. And they had a brilliant designer on that, a guy named Raph Koster, who had come from that Ultima Online. And he's just a really smart game designer. If you can ever watch one of his lectures, like he lectured a lot at GDC. And, we're like, oh my God, they're making EverQuest 2 and Star Wars Galaxies, and they have the Star Wars intellectual property. We're fucked. Like, how are we going to compete? And everybody had seen the success of EQ, EverQuest, and everybody was going to make an MMO. And it was just a question of who was going to win.
So you're feeling this immense pressure. You have this small team of just this hodgepodge of this unlikely team that kind of looks fast forward into Overwatch, the heroes in Overwatch, but working extremely hard. Now, you told me about crazy work hours, and not because you were forced to, but because you wanted to, because your heart was in it, because you're like, this is everything. Like, you loved it.
Yeah, the games industry has a terrible reputation for insane amounts of overtime. It's just called crunch. Like, do you crunch or not? These days, crunch is not allowed, not permitted, heavily frowned upon. If we were to work overtime, somebody write an article about it next week and say how horrible we are for working overtime. Back then, we worked insane, and I mean insane hours. The longest shift I ever worked straight was 30 hours. That's when we were gold mastering Warcraft 3. This was in I think
wow.
War 3 shipped on July 3rd, 2002.
Here's a difference, though. I feel like this is how I feel. This is not reality. I bet back then they had a fucking computer, and this is damn near also their gaming computer. I bet they would log in the middle of their shift for an hour to like run a dungeon in EverQuest because they had to, and then get back to work. Right? Like their lunch breaks consisted of actually playing the game. So yes, he had a 30-hour shift, but like you get these very comfortable gamer breaks, I would call it. Maybe still today, I don't know. No, that's not to take away from a 30-hour shift, but it's not like you're sitting there crunching in a Google Doc for 30 hours straight. Maybe I'm off base, but
so this would have been like late June, early July, probably late June. And I had nothing to do with War 3. I should just say that. Like in the credits, I'm additional help or additional testing or something like that. When I showed up in May of 2002, it was all hands on deck, World of Warcraft for E3. We got through E3, and then all hands on deck, the whole company get War 3 out the door
For shipping Warcraft
for
3.
shipping Warcraft 3. And because I had not been involved with the game at all, and I was a brand new, wet behind the ears game designer, they're like, you're just going to help test whatever we tell you to test.
Mhm.
So we're trying to gold master, and there's a crash that happens rarely if you run one of the cinematics. Like, you have to be watching the cinematic after one of the levels, and then there was a crash that happened. And so a programmer put in some logging to catch it, and then they needed somebody to just over and over again, I need the crash to happen so I can fix the bug. And I sat there for 30 hours and just watched the cinematic for 30
Which
hours
cinematic?
straight. And it was the funniest thing. Like, it was almost surreal watching everybody leave at the, which was a trickle out. Like, everybody kind of trickles out like at
Mhm.
different hours. The family guys go much earlier than the single guys. And then watching everybody show up again the next morning, and they're all like dressed different. They look all refreshed. And I'm just like in the same position,
Yeah.
like eyes are beat red.
To the soundtrack of the cinematic.
Yeah. But we crunched World of Warcraft. The date slipped. So you do this thing. I remember Mark Kern standing the team up and saying, we're going to crunch early so we don't have to crunch later in the project.
Mhm.
And I really believe he wasn't manipulating us. Like, I really genuinely believe that he believed in that.
Mhm.
But with games, anything can happen. And we slip uncontrollably all the time. And we slipped, and it sort of created just this death march, endless death march that, like, to this day, members of the WoW team will remember, like, Newport rib. If I say that, they'll have, like, twitches because, like, they would cater the dinner. They'd bring it in at, like, 6 or 7 at
Mhm.
night, and everybody was eating Newport rib or Panda Express. It was, like, the worst diet ever. I actually like Newport rib, no shade on them,
Mhm.
but you can only eat so much of it.
Yeah.
And the carpets are stained, and like dudes are falling asleep on the couches. And it was an unhealthy work environment. It gets pinned on because at a lot of places it is executive driven
Mhm.
and it is mandated from the top. But the hours that I worked, I never blamed on anyone but myself. I just wanted to.
Mhm.
I remember, coming in on Memorial Day, like, with sand from the beach on my feet because I really wanted to get some work done that day, and working through Christmas. And those were things I wanted to do. I never felt like somebody, held my feet to the coals.
Yeah, it's such a complicated thing because okay, you could say that's unhealthy, but I know a large number of people, especially in their 20s, but actually throughout their career, that have been in companies that do crunch for a thing they believe in, for a thing they love, and it's some of the most fulfilling years of their life, months and years of their life. And they also, it's not just fulfilling, they grow from it, they learn from it. And and especially when they
I'm gonna grab a
talk
drink.
back about it, about that time, they can see
What the
how
fuck is
incredible it
that
was.
keyboard? You're
Of course,
right.
when you're going through it,
The hell?
sometimes it's
You could fill
extremely
that thing with
difficult. You
water
don't
and drink
know.
from it.
And then the crunch, like you mentioned,
The
it's
fuck?
supposed to be a month or two, and then it turns out to be a half a year, and then maybe it turns out to be something like a Titan type game where you never actually ship it, and it's heartbreaking and the pain that's all. But then you look back and you realize how incredible that journey was.
I think
Ugh.
like my reflections on it many years later, and having gone through like pretty crazy levels of crunch to more controlled, I think where crunch is problematic and people are good to.
All right, so they're gonna talk about working big hours. How Blizzard made. Let's go to this one. This looks interesting. Let it run. It's 5 hours. I got other
I
shit
mean,
I'm doing.
again, you continue to speak with so much humility, but WoW turned out to be one of the biggest games of all time, both in terms of critical acclaim and then Wrath of the Lich King, which by many, maybe this is also a good place to ask about the famous Blizzard polish, So Blizzard as a company has historically, and you were certainly a big part of that, delivered these games that were just got so many pieces right and well functioning and well coordinated and just feel finished in a way that a lot of other games don't get right. So what does it take to take this gigantic game, this game played by millions of people, loved by millions of people, and deliver it in a way where it's like it all just works?
To have a level of polish is like a studio-wide culture
It's an
that
interesting
has to be
speed up
instilled in
slider.
everybody. Like, no one can be satisfied with a bug. Every game is going to have bugs, and Blizzard games have bugs. It's a question of how quickly do you fix them and with what urgency. And as players ourselves, if we're playing as much as anybody else, we're going to be motivated to fix the bugs. There are some really tactical aspects to it too. The quality assurance department at Blizzard is the best in the industry. Like, the people who come and do QA at Blizzard, they're passionate gamers. Many of them want to be developers themselves, and they're not just doing it for a job. They do it because they fucking love the game. And the relationship we tried to develop between us on the development teams and QA was extremely tight. And whenever possible, we also tried to sit as many QA members up with the development team as possible, depending on the logistics of, in the early days, we didn't always have the space for all of QA to sit with us. We were very fortunate on the
How much does a QA tester at Blizzard get paid? I'm curious. $25 per hour, 19 to 35 depending on experience and location. Okay. $68K annually. How good is that? Like, I'm actually so what's the word? Out of touch. So I'm just asking. Not bad. It's California too. Yeah, it is very expensive there. So in California, if y'all are saying not bad, not great, not terrible. Okay, I'm just curious.
Overwatch team to have a large amount of QA sitting with us, and then developing that relationship. In the early days, there were these fears of like, well, QA can't talk to the developers, and trying to shatter that because some of our QA members knew the game so inside out. You would just say to them like, hey, dude, just message me anytime. Here's my home number. Like, call me if there's a bug. If you think we're going to get raked over the coals on this, you got to speak up. I don't care what the chain of command is. Like, we got to fix this thing. So QA was amazing.
I mean, so can you speak to QA, quality assurance, at the peak of the craft? What does it entail? Like, you're basically experiencing the game and trying to figure out on a particular slices of that experience that can be improved.
Yeah, people simplify the
So isn't QA kind of going out of business with all these early access versions of every game nowadays? Isn't like early access just you're basically just paying to be a QA tester? Or is that crazy? No? I mean, maybe they still have it, but it's definitely no, because players are dumb. Really? Kinda. PTR, beta realms, early access. I mean, yeah, in terms of World of Warcraft, but even other games. But I guess they probably still have some QA testers because players aren't, going to be the best. But I feel like that gets a big chunk of it. Every fucking game has that shit. QA does a lot of organizing. Okay, so maybe QA actually takes that feedback from players. Okay, whatever.
role.
I just feel like the way Jeff is talking, he's talking in a way before early access was even a thing, or beta testing for players was a thing. That's how I feel like he's talking about QA testers right now.
Oh, these guys just get to play games all day.
QA looks for specific looks specifically for bugs, players don't. Sure, they don't actually play the game. They're like, all right, like Jeff was saying, he watched a cutscene for 30 hours straight, trying to force a bug to happen so he could submit the crash report to a dev that would fix it, right? That's QA. But if you have tens of thousands of people just playing the game normally, one of the bugs will happen, and hopefully one of those players will submit it. So that trims a lot of it, right? I feel like QA's job is reproducing what the players are saying, and maybe. Either way, moving on.
And then, like, let us know if there's a bug. They are so systematic in the way they test stuff. They come up with these plans that are actually amazing of like who's going to test what. There's a lot of regression testing that goes on. Within QA, there will also be compatibility testing. The Blizzard compatibility department was amazing. Like they had every card, every machine, every configuration, and they would roll through to make sure there wasn't some quirk that was going to come up on some video card or some motherboard that you weren't expecting. But it was all very systematic. It wasn't just Wild West, let's play the game. And then as a developer interacting with QA, you would find that there were certain specialists, whether like for example, on Overwatch, there were a couple of players that like we all were shooter players when we were making Overwatch, but I'm not like esports level shooter player. I'm like, you know, Gen Xer, remember Doom, how good I was
right.
type of shooter player. But we had, you know, a couple of these QA specialists who like they could just snipe from 100 meters out and hit the shot every time and tell us if there was a frame of input delay, you know, and then you sit that person with an engineer and say, hey, I think there's some input lag
That's
here.
amazing.
And sure enough, they'd be right. But you have to have that relationship where the devs trust QA, or just even on like World of Warcraft, they had a great relationship with QA and that they built out a full raid team to do the raids. And then you're not only like looking for bugs, like, hey, the dragon was supposed to fly and instead it just like sunk through the world and the game crashed, which would happen.
A lot of my friends ended
But
up
like
working
if
for the
you
QA
really
team
value
to test
QA,
raids.
you're asking them, what do you do? What do you think? You're, you know, like 10 million people are going to see this. Your opinion, multiply it, you know, it matters. What do you think? You know, are you having fun? Oh, yeah, this is cool. This isn't cool. So QA was important. The other thing that was important is the Blizzard engineering, which you have to architect your game to be hot fixable. And what a hot fix is, games, there's a couple ways to fix them. The way most of us know, because all the software we have gets a patch. You know, you have to update it. You have to download a new version of it. Windows, you know, you get that annoying message like there's a new version of Windows and it takes, you know, a few minutes and you update it. You know, obviously we patch our games and that's where we fix a lot of bugs. But if you really want to run a game like Overwatch or World of Warcraft successfully, you need master level engineers who have architected the client and server in such a way that you can hot fix the game on a dime. And what a hot fix is a server patch that no one's client has to go down for.
It's because you're dealing with a huge number of players and you discover an issue and you want to respond to that issue really quickly.
I don't understand this stuff. This
There's
sounds hard as fuck.
emergency issues like something's crashing. Like the worst case scenario is anytime the server's crashing. Or in Overwatch, like a really catastrophic bug would be something where you have to disable a hero. Like someone found an exploit and you have to disable a hero from the lineup. You want to turn around that hotfix, if you can, in half an hour, get that hero back live. You might have somebody who only plays that hero, and the only reason they're going to play Overwatch is because that hero is active. You don't want to wait
there's
for
3
patches,
rows
and
of
you want
characters
to
now.
hotfix as fast as you can.
Who the fuck?
And then also to improve the game quickly, to just even subtle
Yeah.
stuff to
Players
admit.
feel it. Like
Yeah.
that's where there's this idea of like the love and the craftsmanship of the developer that you can feel. Like any product, your iPhone or Android or like any computer consumer product, you can feel when there are people who loved it behind it and aren't just putting it out on a shelf. And games have that as well, where you can feel the like heart and soul of the developer in the thing. And some of that's like the joy and delight of like that there's a cow level, right? That's you can feel the humanity of the development team through that. But another part of that is like, do they clean up their fucking yard? Does this game work? Is it, and it's not just the bugs and the crashes. It's like when balance gets wacky and stupid and, suddenly everybody's a barbarian and whirlwinding and no one else will play anything else. You're like, we should probably fix that.
Ah, those were the days. I sadly was the barbarian whirlwind guy. It was,
One-handed.
yeah, it brought so much joy. So a lot of people modern day think of you as Jeff from the Overwatch team.
My name is Jeff from the Overwatch team. I'm Jeff from the Overwatch team. I'm Jeff from the Overwatch
Classic.
team.
But y'all must have forgot. You were the game director of WoW in an era when WoW was one of the biggest games in the world. Just, looking back, what wisdom can you draw from that time when you got to experience this era of gaming that changed gaming forever, where it's millions of people playing this video game?
It was my first game I worked on, and I joined it as this entry-level dude.
Yeah.
I still have my offer letter from Blizzard, which was for $35K a year. That's what I was making. And
Jesus. In California, I guess back then, but even
very shortly after
jack
WoW
shit.
shipped, Alan left his lead before the beta or like right around the beta. And then Rob took over as the lead designer. And then he left the team very shortly after WoW shipped to go start StarCraft 2. And he put myself and Tom Chilton in charge. Tom is a designer he was a great partner of mine and a great leader. And he actually came from Ultima Online. And so I always looked up to Tom because he had a lot more experience than I did. And this is like early 2005. The world was on fire. The servers were barely running. WoW had taken off like gangbusters. And they basically put me and Tom in charge of WoW. And at the time they promoted me, my title, I didn't even have a lead title. My title was senior game designer. And Tom and I were running the design of WoW at that time. So I thought it was totally normal. And I thought what we were experiencing with WoW was just normal for making a video game because it was the first video game that I had worked on.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was the funnest joyride because we were working on WoW. We were still working insane hours. And then I'd get home, eat dinner, and then me and my wife would log in and play WoW, for 4 hours. And then I'd go in the next day and I'd work. And it was just my whole life was World of Warcraft. And I loved it. Like I loved everything from, the creative meetings with Chris Metzen and just what an inspiration and muse he was, down to the simplest, dumbest design stuff that like we as game designers, like you want to talk about why a button is in the lower left versus lower right and what does that mean. That's like 2 hours of discussion. And is there a better way? Like the 10,000 minutia problems were thrilling to me. And then also the big disasters, like I had, in the early days of WoW, we didn't really have all the processes in place for like how to deal with being a successful online game. And I literally had GMs, like game masters, these are customer support guys, calling my home phone at 3 a.m. Like I remember this one time there was some faction token in Stranglethorn Vale, and they figured out a way to exploit it. And this
Faction
GM
token.
calls me panicked. It's 3 a.m. He's like, I'm just spawning what did we call them? Guardians of Blizzard. They were these giant infernals that we just made that instantly death touched anything. We used to have them when we were in the beta, like off in the distance of places players weren't supposed to get in case they cheated their way there. And this GM is just spawning them all over Stranglethorn Vale because he's worried because the players are exploiting. And it's like 3 a.m. and I'm talking in hushed tones because my wife is sleeping right next to the bed. I'm doing this because it was actually like before the cell phone days when I actually had a landline. But that's just how, and I loved it. I loved the thrill of those big moments, the minutia. And I felt like through the running WoW Live, which was me and Tom together with an amazing
STV
team,
must
we kind
be
of learned how to be the WoW
purged.
team. And
Can you imagine?
putting WoW in a box and shipping it was like only chapter 1 in a 12-chapter book,
I'm
essentially.
still just picturing a GM just like, dude, I don't know how to deal with this bug. So I'm actually just fucking killing everyone with these GM infernals. Can you imagine just questing normally in STV and it's actually just raining hell and you don't know what's going on, but then there's actually a GM on the other end freaking the fuck out, doesn't know how to deal with this bug, so just killing them all. That's fucking great.
And that first, how to run the game, how to patch it, what type of content, how to deal with emergencies, what should our customer support be like? I mean, we would debate, should we have a launcher or not? You know, in the early days, the only reason the launcher existed in WoW was to run anti-cheat on your machine. And we had a moment where we figured out how to put that into the game and out of the launcher. And it was the first time I ever really had an in-depth conversation with Mike Morheim. He's like, you got to bring the launcher back, guys. And we're like, why? He's like, there's no better way for us to talk to our players. And I remember trying to hide the launcher. And to this day, Mike was right. Like that launcher turned out to be the best thing we ever had. That's essentially what BattleNet has morphed into these days. But all those decisions, and when it came time to make Burning Crusade, you know, at that point, Tom and I were leads. We were full. They had actually promoted us. There were 2 big exoduses of groups that quit Blizzard. They were disenfranchised. If you can believe it, like we just shipped World of Warcraft, and this whole group just walked out the door. I was actually sitting my desk faced Morheim's office, and I watched them all go in and quit. And they were the group that formed Carbine, which made the game WildStar. Ended up taking them 10 years to make. And they were just really unhappy with World of Warcraft, and they were unhappy with
What expansion was WoW on 10 years before WildStar released? I want to know what state WoW was in. That's a crazy question. Okay, so June 3rd, 2014. What? Vanilla? WildStar was released in 2014, exactly 10 years prior to that. World of Warcraft had not really. Oh, he just said? I didn't. Sorry, I'm dumb. What were they unhappy about? Maybe he'll talk about it. That's crazy.
I don't know what they were unhappy with. They were unhappy enough to walk out the door right after we had shipped WoW.
That's incredible. But what is it? Just because they put their heart
It's
and soul in the game and they maybe get
crazy.
exhausted in a certain kind of way?
Yeah, and I don't wanna it's not fair of me to speak on their behalf. I think they were promised some compensation that they didn't immediately.
Hold on, someone has something else before we move on. The event, was this the STV event? Oh my God, is this when he was just dropping infernals and killing people? Here we go. GM owns everyone. Shut up. Oh, so here's the token they were abusing. I bet there was a system where you could like get more rep tokens. Oh, and this is where you go to turn them in, so he's just blasting them. Look, there's the infernal. He just spawned it right there. Right where you have to turn in and get the tokens. Oh my God, it blasts from forever. Damn, fucking proof, man. Right now, this guy right here, he is on the phone with Jeff right now at 3 a.m. There's no time in the corner back then, I guess. We don't see the time in game. Crazy. We got lore. All right, moving on.
Immediately see. I don't know if the game, like, here's the weird part when you make a game. When you come up with the idea and you start pitching it to people, that's the best the game is ever going to be. And then you work on it, like, games I've worked on take 5 years, Overwatch was 2.5, 3 years. Every day you get close to ship, the imagination of the ideal game gets farther and farther from the reality, and you're always shipping this like greatly sacrificed thing that nowhere near matches the imagination
Mhm.
of the inception of the idea. So you become disenfranchised with the concept
So
over time.
in some sense, you're constantly in a state of disappointment. You're basically shipping a lesser thing than you've been dreaming about. So you're doing
Yes.
less and less and less, saying no and no and cutting and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's difficult, psychologically difficult, but nevertheless, the result when you zoom out is one of the greatest games of all time that millions of people played for thousands of hours. It's just what did you ever have an experience, a realization how huge WoW was? In terms of not like statistics on the server and so on, but the cultural impact it had.
The first time was the first BlizzCon, which was in 2005. So when WoW shipped, and this is so weird to tell people, but on the team, uh, not everyone, but a lot of us were very demoralized after WoW
Really?
shipped. There were all sorts of issues with the servers because the game did way more successful than we expected it to do. And the server load was just nuts. Like we were doing our best to hire database programmers, because we just didn't know how to deal with this sheer scope of the game. But when you're an individual, like, and at that time, like I mentioned, there were multiple exoduses of people who quit Blizzard. They went and formed a couple notable studios. One was Carbine, the other was Red 5. And we lost like kind of our core people. Like when Red 5 started, that was our team leader. That was Mark Kern, and our art director, Bill Petrus. They quit. When Carbine started, it was, I think, all of our animators and some of our best programmers. And like, it's really demoralizing when you lose team members like that. But then we were also underwater. Like the servers aren't running. We're not able to keep up with demand. And we had to start putting patches out. And now we're making patches like for a while we had one animator who stuck around, and then eventually he left also. But you're doing like, okay, we got to now do a patch without an animator. A lot of our art team was gone at that point, and you're
Really,
trying to
man.
keep the ship afloat, and the morale was just in the shitter. Like everybody felt very down on Team 2, the WoW team is called Team 2, and that we had somehow failed. And during that time, there was this idea to do BlizzCon. And the way that started was EverQuest had done these like meetups because they knew it was like a big guild social game and people would get together at like some hotel ballroom and you'd sit with your guild at like a
There's no way
banquet
he's still playing
room
EverQuest.
table. And to give credit where credit's due, I remember sitting in the meeting for what was to become BlizzCon. It was Pardo who said, Blizzard's bigger than that. We're not just one game. And I know everybody's focused on World of Warcraft right now. We should do BlizzCon. And at the time, we had a game called StarCraft Ghost was in development, and that was getting ready to show. And there was Frozen Throne, which was the expansion to Warcraft 3. But like we knew we were
Whoa,
going to.
hold on. What time are we in right now? Because what released first, Frozen Throne or Classic WoW? I'm under the mindset we're in TBC right now. Am I crazy? This is before TBC. Okay. Really? Frozen Throne released after Vanilla? I actually didn't know that. Because Vanilla released in 2004, didn't it? Of course. I didn't know. You understand? Like I'm 9 years old, 10 years old, and I got the Frozen Throne at a GameStop. There was no news. There was no streamers, no websites to look up. I don't know things. I just know I had Frozen Throne, and I remember having Vanilla, and I don't remember ever having one before the other. I just assumed Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne came out before Vanilla. I don't know. I didn't know that. Moving on.
Make StarCraft 2. And then there was a lot of motion happening with Blizzard
It
North.
was before
which is
Vanilla?
a whole
Okay.
separate story. But there was like, hey, we could really do a cool show. That's this BlizzCon thing. And at first, we kind of announced it and it just was crickets. You know, when you're like excited about something, you're like, man, everybody's going to love, like, we're doing BlizzCon. Everybody's kind of like, crickets, what's BlizzCon? Who cares? And we're idiots. We're reading the forums, and the forums are just flaming us all the time. Like, there's lag on this server, and can't log into that server. And that was our perspective of what was happening. And then, like I said, give Mike Morheim credit where credit's due. He kept us committed to that launcher, and they put the BlizzCon tickets on the launcher, which they hadn't done before. It was on the website. And so everybody who logged into World of Warcraft suddenly got this like, hey, we're doing BlizzCon in Anaheim. Do you want to come? Sold out instant, like instantly sold out. And when I showed up at that show, one of the most emotional things in my life, it was nothing but an outpouring of love. And up until that point, your perception was because you're just reading online. And
Literally
it
reading the
was-
feedback that he would give
the
EverQuest.
perception is such hatred because people who are passionate online, they express themselves in the harshest ways because it gets attention. You know, that's the lesson I should have learned from my early days. And it's such an unfortunate thing because then you met these people in person and they loved World of Warcraft.
Why Jeff left Blizzard? This looks interesting.
Ultimately broke me in my Blizzard career was I got called in the CFO's office and he sits me down and he says, he gives me a date, which at the time was 2020 and was going to slip to 2021, but at the time it was 2020. And he said, Overwatch has to make in 2020. And then every year after that, it needs a recurring revenue. And then he says to me, if it doesn't do...
How much do y'all think it was? $100 million. I mean, he was talking about how Overwatch made $500 million earlier, wasn't he? It had to have been hundreds of millions minimum. It's about how many hundreds, right? I don't know. 200 million, 300 million, 500 million again. I don't know.
Dollars. We're going to lay off 1,000 people, and that's going to be on you.
Wow.
And that was just the biggest fuck you moment I had in my career. It felt surreal to be in that condition. And as somebody who's worked on a lot of games, made a lot of games, you get in these meetings where they're like, Fortnite has 1,400 people working on it. If you just hire 1,400 people and make it free to play, we'll make that money, right? And that was, I had believed I would never work anyplace but Blizzard. I loved it. It was a part of who I was. And I felt I was a part of it. And I literally thought I would retire from the place. I never thought the day would come. And that was it. I was like, we're done here. Luckily for Blizzard, that CFO is no longer there. I think there's a message to creative people out there and people who make stuff. We're so focused on the love of the craft that we get lost in it, and we love doing it. And we're not cutthroat, and we don't have that kind of ambition. We have a different kind of ambition.
You can hold space or left click to make it 2 times
but there's
temporarily.
This whole world, especially
you're right.
as soon as you're lucky enough to have success, that are very cutthroat and very ambitious. And for whatever reason, we keep giving ourselves to them. And we need to stop giving ourselves. World of Warcraft, when we made it, there was no CFO at Blizzard. You don't need a CFO to make World of Warcraft. You need artists, engineers, designers, producers, and an audio team.
You don't need to bring in, just because you're making a lot of money, it doesn't mean you need to now start adulting by bringing in a CFO. You can figure it out.
And there are great finance guys. Like, I've worked with finance guys who get it and get out of the way and respect, and they're gamers and they sort of understand. But like, I wish developers would understand their own value more and stop handing the golden goose to people who don't deserve it.
How painful was it to say goodbye?
It broke me. I think after you've been at a place like Blizzard, which I love Blizzard to this day. I have nothing but warm, fond memories. I mean, there's those moments where you're like, I wish that hadn't happened. But on the whole, that place is mecca for game development. And everything I have is due to Blizzard. They provided for me and my family, made me the person I am. So separating from Blizzard was one of the most painful things. And I was very sad when I resigned, and I didn't realize how broken I was until recently. Like, the morning grieving I had gone through of like, I think I'm a little fucked in the head for not being there anymore. How could I give that up? How could I not be there anymore? It was really, really painful leaving.
Can we just speak to, I don't know, I don't think we can give enough love to Blizzard. It's a legendary company. For me personally, for everybody, for millions of people, created some of the greatest games ever. Warcraft, Starcraft universe, Diablo, WoW, Overwatch. What made it such a legendary game company? Just looking back at the whole of it.
The start is Mike, Allen, and Frank. It was run by 3 gamers. They were all 3 of them programmers. They made the games before they just ran the company.
All right, I think that's going to have to be my stopping point.